In our culture, working hard is often equated to working for long hours, and whilst I certainly agree that working longer hours will lead to more things getting done, I don't think it's necessarily a sustainable tactic in the long term. And that's why over the years I made a very conscious decision to try never stay late at work, to never work overtime. And this might seem strange compared to what other architects do who routinely stay overtime, but what I think I have come to realize is that it's much more important to understand how we use our time rather than how long we spend on a given project. So in this video I thought I'll give you the overview about the principles behind this thinking and how you can implement them into your own projects and your own workflow. Hi guys, my name is Alex. I'm an architect in London, and on this channel we focus on tactics and strategies to improve our design workflow. And in this video I thought I'll cover 7 tips on how to stay laser focused during your work so that you never have to work overtime again. Now before I jump in, I have to say that I'm not totally against the idea of staying overtime. I do that myself occasionally in order to catch up with the workload, or there are times when it's important to advance in the career and get some new learning, in which cases we need to put some extra effort to advance to that next level. But I think the problem becomes when there's a routine that we get into, that time and time again we stay late until it becomes a pattern. Okay, so the tip number 1 is to know who you are serving. And this is an interesting point. As architects, we're often confusing that the person we're serving is the client of the project. And I think in a lot of instances is actually our immediate superiors. So it might be more useful from productivity standpoint of view to understand what the objectives of the partners or directors on the projects are. So knowing who the client is and knowing their objectives is certainly a way to begin with the end of mind and start thinking about concrete objectives that we need to achieve to advance the project forward. Now the second point to consider is what your motivation is, and all of us are motivated by completely different things, and those things might not be the same for one person as they are for the next person. So figuring out for yourself what those things are, I think, are crucial. Now, for example, there are a lot of people who are people's pleasers, and what they're motivated is by this fear of failing somebody else. I personally get motivated by deadlines and the stress and panic that I get of not achieving the task or desired outcome. Now, the other thing that I have turned into a habit is the to-do lists. Now, to-do lists can be weekly and daily. I think they're important because they reduce what's called a decision fatigue. And so what they help us to do is to, first of all, clear our mind, and 2, get into a groove straight away, so that whenever you arrive to work, you don't have to spend half an hour figuring out what you need to do. If you get into a habit of having a to-do list at the start of the week or at the end of the week, and plan your week accordingly, and then reevaluate those targets on a daily basis, I think that's a great way to stay focused and reduce the strain on your brain and actually focus on work rather than thinking about the work. So the next tip is the rest, and I think rest is severely underrated in our society. We routinely are tired, and I think that severely impacts our ability to think and our cognitive kind of abilities. And I think there's like loads of science behind the sleep and how important it is, because it's one of those things that if you improve the sleep, it will have an impact across all areas of life. So the next thing that helps me to keep focused is the removal of distractions. Now this might be quite an obvious thing, but I think it's still important to cover it because I think people look at distractions in a slightly wrong way. Whenever we have a notification on the phone and we're in the middle of something and we choose to look at that phone, I think it's often perceived that, oh, we just get interrupted by 5 or 10 minutes, whatever. And I don't think it's actually true. I think an impact of distraction is much higher than we think it is. So for example, whenever you take out the phone and you scroll your feed for, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes, it's not just those 4 or 5 minutes that are the impact of that distraction. It's actually the 5 minutes after that we put our phone away and we're trying to remember, oh shit, where was I in this task? And it's also the next maybe 10-20 minutes that we're trying to get back into the same rhythm that we were before. Now the next point is the batching. Now batching has become quite popular in the world of productivity, and it's to do with batching the same tasks together, so that in theory, whenever you have similar tasks, you can finish them one after another in a sequence, and in theory it should take less time than it would have otherwise taken if you were to complete the same task in the different periods of time, because there is a time associated again in getting into a groove and then completing the task and winding down. So if you have like a bunch of emails you have to send, it makes sense to do them the same time. If you have, I don't know, some other bitty tasks like document or file management that needs to be sorted, it makes sense to do that all at the same time. I think similarly we should also consider batching long periods of time for one task. So things that are more creative and take longer and requires more thinking, like drawing work for example, or making a 3D model, or any type of thinking or researching work, ideally that should be allocated more time than kind of sporadic small tasks. And whilst in the short term, jumping from one task to another might get you that dopamine hit in your brain that like, oh yeah, I'm doing great. Overall, I don't think it's super productive. And so the point number 7 is the focus on the outcome. So outcome focus is slightly counterintuitive thing that I've discovered, but basically I think when it comes to architecture, architects are quite perfectionistic, and I think as professionals we're focused too much on the process and not enough on the goals that needs to be achieved. And this is a critical point because whenever we focus on the process, we tend to become perfectionistic about it. So we tend to develop everything to the last detail, everything has to be perfect and wonderful, but guess what? That leads to more time being spent on those tasks. So if we reframe our thinking into getting more into a outcome-driven thinking, i.e., we know that we need to get that one plan done. We do know that we need to send it out, straight after. What do? We just go ahead and we develop that plan and we finish it and we send it off, and we don't worry about, not all of the line weights are 100% developed, or the composition doesn't look quite right, or there are a couple of things that are, ideally would be changed, and to do all those things it would require another 5 hours. If we are outcome based, we don't see those little things that are actually not important, and the client or whoever receives that drawing will probably not even notice. If you like this video, you might also like this other video that I made on how I manage my time. And in that video, I go through a couple of time management tactics and techniques that I use to stay productive during my working day. So if time management is something you're struggling with, then check that video out and I'll see you on the other side.